Welcome everyone to our very last Skillathon workshop. Thank you all for joining in. Many of you have been in every workshop, so we're super excited about that. It is our final one. We've got some things in the works for coming up. Keep you active all through the summer. Hope everyone's enjoying being done with school and staying safe on the farm or at the house, and enjoying the few livestock shows we are able to participate in. But thank you all for joining. Just remember, this is recorded. It will go up on YouTube in the next coming week or two. And that's pretty much all of my announcements. Thank you all. Hope everyone has a great summer. And I'm going to turn it over to Seth and Sarah.
Well, hello, everybody. My name's Seth Nagy. I'm the County Extension Director and Livestock and Field Crops Agent in Caldwell County. And Sarah, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Sarah Moyer. I'm the 4-H Chief Development Agent in Caldwell County, so I get to work with Seth. I have an ag communications background and grew up on a cattle operation in Kansas. So I like forages too, and we're happy to be joining you today.
Well, awesome. Well, let's see. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I've got a little presentation we're going to go through. And since what I like is we've got a nice size group, so I think we're going to be able to interact with one another well. So we'll see how that goes. I'm going to try sharing my screen, and this should work. Let's get this. Start presentation. Oh, all right. Well, I'll tell you what. Well, you guys, let's see. Sarah, can you?
Sure, yes.
I'm not sure how to make this part work.
All right, so if you all have been attending the clinic, then I imagine you're familiar or becoming more familiar with some of the features that you can use in Zoom. So today we're going to use a couple. One is the annotation. And so if you're on a computer, or if you can go up to view options, it's not on your taskbar, it's going to be more up at the top. There's going to be view options, and you can annotate. And that'll give you the ability to put some markers onto the map. And we want to know where you live or where you're from. So if you'd like to add in a stamp, or like Seth is, there we go, there's a star. We'd like to know where you're at. And if you need to turn on your mic, if you need to ask questions, I see somebody's, they're down. There we go, you're getting the hang of it.
All right.
I know where you're at.
I'm not as familiar with some of all the exact nomenclature on the eastern side of the state, but it looks like we've got folks that are in the intercoastal plain, Sarah. and those are some big ag counties down there. But in forages, I kind of like forages. It's what I spend a good bit of time with, because you kind of are what you eat, and better nutrition, better forages, a lot of times makes for better livestock. So that's important. And knowing where people are, that determines kind of what happens across the state. So I'm going to go to the next slide. All right. Oh, I got to clear. I think there's a way of doing it.
I can clear it off. There you
go. All right. Thank you, Sarah. This is a pretty powerful statement right here. Forages, particularly the grasses, are the most important plants on the face of the earth. Does anybody agree or disagree with that? I agree. And that was actually written by a guy by the name of Glenn Buxton. He was born in the 1920s, and he actually worked his whole career as a forage plant breeder, among other things. One of the things he did, he traveled internationally, and he noticed that in parts of the world people were starving. And he bred a millet that could be used and harvested for grain. But the thing that you guys might be interested in, have you ever heard of Tifton Bermuda grass, or coastal, I'll say coastal Bermuda grass? Well, if you have, that's an improved variety of Bermuda grass. And Glenn Buxton was actually the fellow that did the breeding work on that in the 50s and 1960s. And I remember speaking with some farmers that were old guys back when I was young, and they thought that was just the most amazing thing, that they could take the biggest weed that the farmers had to deal with, which was Bermuda grass, and make it into something useful. So anyways, pretty neat guy, Glenn Buxton. He has since passed away. He passed away in early 2000s.
Seth, I'll make a quick comment before you do your video. If
Oh, yes.
you all like to use the reaction buttons, you can, if Seth's talking and you want to agree or make note of something, you can use those as well. On to Forage Week.
All right. Well, since we're going to talk about forages, it turns out that we just missed celebrating National Forage Week, which that's something that the American Forage and Grasslands Council has sort of sponsored for about the last 9 years, I think. They want to raise awareness of forages because most people don't think of them that much, but they're, as we're going to see, they're really important. And hopefully by the end of today, you'll have if you don't already have an appreciation, you'll have a bigger appreciation. So let's watch this video. It's a short one. All right. Well, that's to me, some of the pictures and the images, and then if I imagine what the world would be like without forages, it's really kind of interesting. But there were really a lot of things in that video, and I was wondering if you can just think for a minute, what did you learn, or what was surprising in that video that we just saw? And when I actually watched it about 3 times. And every time I watched it, I kept thinking, gosh, there's really a lot in this video. But I want you to either think about it or just take a minute and write something down. and we'll see if you got some of what I got. So I'm going to move on to the next slide, and let's see. This is what I got out of the video. Forages, horses, cattle, and hay. That was kind of in the beginning. Did you ever think about how much cows really eat? A cow eats 60% of their body weight each month. Forage feeds people too, although I didn't see anybody eating any hay or grass. So I think there were some things that maybe weren't well explained how that works. Certainly there's a lot of acreage in the country that's covered in forage, 25 million acres. They said 3 times the size of Texas. And then forage protects the environment and provides habitat for wildlife. Did anybody get anything else? Well, that's some of the things I got. And sometimes when I get numbers like this, like a cow eats 60% of their body weight each month, sometimes it prompts me to do just a little bit of math and to think about it. So I don't know, can somebody figure out if they're eating 60% of their body weight each month, what percentage of their body weight are they going to eat each day? Can anybody do that math?
I don't see anybody raising their hand right now.
Oh, well, I think I got my pointer on it. I thought, what is that? Well, it turns out I'm going to help you out. If it's there's roughly 30 days in a month. So if I divide 60 by 30, you probably got the same answer I did. That's 2%. So each day an animal consumes 2% of their body weight. And that's with hay, that's somewhere, because hay, of course, has a little bit of water in it. They're assuming that weight is actually the weight without water, the dry matter part. But that's something, one of those things you can keep in your brain. So if somebody says, gosh, I've got a cow and I want to feed it for a week, and you know it's going to eat 2% of its body weight a day, then you can actually do some calculations based on the weight of that animal and know how much it's going to eat. If it was a 1,000-pound animal, then that would be 20 pounds it would eat each day. But most cows are a little bigger than that. So I usually use the term 26 pounds. Anybody have questions on that? Well, one of the things that video covered, it covered a bunch of things. It talked about forage feeds people too. If you remember, it showed a picture of pizza, showed a picture of hamburgers, showed a picture of marshmallows, showed a picture of honey. Of course, bees forage for nectar. And so that's not really a lot. Depends what your definition of livestock is. But it turns out that we're not eating the forage. We're letting the cows eat the forage, and then we eat the hamburger if it's a beef cow, or if it's pizza, then I think of cheese, I think of dairy with that, along with the ice cream cone, and then the marshmallows. That's kind of a byproduct. But anyways, to help kind of frame all this stuff in my mind, I thought we might use the concept of an ecosystem. And an ecosystem is a community of living organisms in conjunction with non-living components of their environment interacting as a system. These biotic and abiotic components are linked together through nutrient cycles and energy flows. So of course, anything that's biotic is alive, anything that's abiotic is not. So when I think about an ecosystem, that's kind of what you're doing. And that, to me, that helps, kind of gives me a map of how things are working. A lot of times you'll hear, instead of, if you're at NC State, they actually have a pasture ecology program class that they teach. And ecology is just the branch of biology that deals with relationships that organisms have to one another. And that's the study of ecosystems. So you may see the term ecology, and I use ecosystems and ecology a little bit interchangeably. So I use either one of those terms. So when I'm thinking about it, I sometimes think in pictures, and this is kind of how I was thinking of it. On the left, you can see we've got, in this case, it's some green grass, and on the right, that looks a little bit like maybe a steer. So basically, this whole pasture ecosystem or pasture ecology, we've got grass or some kind of forage, and then we've got something that's actually harvesting it, because we can't turn grass directly into hamburger or cheese for a pizza. We use these animals as intermediates. So I've got the grass sort of lit up, and I thought maybe we'd talk about that first. We'd sort of go into some depths about grass and forage in this case. So the first thing, and I know we've got some folks in Eastern North Carolina, does anybody recognize what this is? This is a type of grass. This is one of, I'm going to go over two major grasses in North Carolina, and this is one of the two. I actually was going to start with the other one, but I guess I got my slides mixed up. So anybody want to take a stab at it? It grows in the summertime. It's a warm season grass. Anybody? I'll accept the answer even if it's a little bit wrong. I'll take it.
Quiet bunch. We have Emily says Bermuda.
Oh, Emily, thank you. I appreciate you throwing me a lifeline. You get a gold star. So that is 100% correct. That's Bermuda grass. Let's look at the other major forage species in North Carolina that are pretty common. And this is, there's actually a lot of places in Eastern North Carolina where it's too sandy for this grass to thrive. This is actually a picture. It stays green all year long. I'll see if anybody else wants to take a stab at this one. This is called tall fescue. You guys may have heard of Kentucky 31. That's sort of what it looks like when this is right here, a field of actually newly seeded. This was seeded the year before. And these seed heads show up in the springtime. Typically May, you'll start to see the seed heads. This was probably late May where the seed heads are already turning brown. And then this is what they look like, an up close picture. And if you'll notice, this is considered a bunch grass. And so if there's any holes there, it won't fill in. Whereas with Bermuda, since Emily recognized that, I'm sure she knows that stuff will run and fill in, and any kind of insult that happened to the pasture, it will recover well. So those are the two major grasses. But there's a lot of things that could be grown. And if you'll notice, this chart is at the top, we can see grasses. And then underneath that, it's divided into two things. There's this perennial and annual. So a perennial is something that's going to come back year after year after year, whereas an annual is going to grow from seed, make seed, die, and then it has to come back from seed the following growing season. So we can see the first perennial here is tall fescue, and that was what I called the other major pasture grass in North Carolina. And we can see under warm season, we have cool season here. So that's tall fescue, orchard grass, Kentucky bluegrass, red top, which red top was what we had before fescue in the 40s. Timothy, which will grow in the mountain areas, as well as perennial ryegrass and rescue grass. And we have this thing called warm season perennial grasses, and Bermuda grass is the first one. You may have heard of some of these others, switchgrass, flaccid grass, Dallas grass, Bahia grass. I didn't know what Bahia grass was one time, and I was told to go bush hog a pasture of it, and I thought there was something wrong with the tractor. It's a tough grass. Carpet grass, gamma grass, and actually switchgrass and gamma grass are natives. And then we have this other column under annual. So these are ones that are planted each year if they're going to come up. So our cool season, that would be stuff that we plant in the fall. It would be ryegrass and small grains. Of course, the warm season grasses, pearl millet, sorghum, sorghum Sudan hybrids, which would sometimes be called sudex, and crabgrass. Crabgrass, a lot of people, you may have thought of that as a weed, but it turns out that grazing animals can actually, they don't know it's a weed, they like it. Really hadn't planned on talking about legumes, but I hate to ignore this whole side of the slide here. But legumes are a really interesting plant. So white clover and red clover are two of the more common ones. You probably heard of alfalfa. That's another perennial cool season legume, and that's considered the queen of the forages. It's the most high quality. It's fantastic. But one of the things that legumes do is they have an association with some bacteria. In the legumes, this plant captures sunlight and it captures its energy and turns that energy into sugar. And it shares a little bit of that with some bacteria that are on the roots. And that bacteria in turn is able to actually take nitrogen out of the air and make it available to these plants. So that's a really neat trick. Something that is really, really cool. Anything in the bean family, so soybeans, there's a bunch of things that do it. There's only a few warm season legumes in Charissa lespedeza. A lot of times you'll see the highway department used to plant that on the side of the road. And then this is an annual lespedeza cobe, which although it's on this list, I don't get too excited about it. It doesn't do a lot. If anybody in the audience is a beekeeper, some of these annuals over here, we've actually got some beekeepers that actually plant some annual clovers and maintain some perennial clovers for their bees. But I just thought I'm now going to just talk, mainly about our tall fescue and Bermuda grass when I talk about pastures. But I wanted to make sure I introduced that there is a little more than just those two. But I thought we'd cover the common ones first. So part of when I think about grass is, of course, it's not available. It doesn't grow the same every day. But it turns out grazing animals, more or less, they eat more consistent every day than how the grass grows. So Bermuda grass, remember from that chart, it was a warm season perennial. And we can see right here that what this line represents is growth. So it just starts to wake up a little bit in March. In April, it really starts taking off. And then in June, July, and August, those 3 months, it does most of its production. And then, oops, I went forward. And then towards the fall, it starts getting cooler. It shuts down and it actually goes dormant with frost. So let's take a look at fescue. Fescue, of course, if you remember from the chart, that's our cool season perennial. So when I think about cool season, I think about the spring and the fall. And so that's actually, it'll grow a little bit in the summertime if it gets some rain. But you can see it's growing out here in December, and it's actually even waking up here in February. But when it gets real hot, that's when it really slows down. So if we have an animal and we have a pasture, it would have a lot to eat right here. Then it might get a little hungry in the summertime. And in fact, there are several cattlemen around here that actually typically end up feeding some hay in the summertime. And then when they get to the fall, everything's good again. But one of the neat things is that typically you can have a pasture that either has 2 different kinds of grass, or in this case, it's probably 2 pastures with 2 different grasses. And it looks like my slide's cut off, but this red line is actually the tall fescue, and the Bermuda grass is the black line. So Bermuda grass will produce as much in 3 months as what fescue will do, in 9 months. So if we had an animal and we started it in March, it would eat fescue. And then as the fescue started to slow down, then we'd move it into the Bermuda grass pasture. And then when the Bermuda grass started to slow down, we'd move it back to the tall fescue. So, and that's, some of the fields are, have multiple species in them. But we don't always just have to have one grass, and everything's going to have a little different curve. We saw some of the annuals, like a cool season annual, like ryegrass, that would start this curve a little sooner than fescue. And on the other end, if we had small grains were one of the other cool season annuals, this bump here would actually be moved out into more into November. So you can actually adjust when your forage is available based on what you got in the pasture. I wanted to just mention a little bit about how pasture grows, or how grass grows. And I don't know what I've done, but for some reason, I think my screen, can you see the time at the bottom, Sarah, or is it cut off?
Yes,
can
I
you see
it. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, good. Maybe it's not cut off then. Well, what this is showing is this right here. This is percentage of mature height. So we can see phase 1, it looks like the grass is real short. And when the grass is real short, what's actually happening is the leaf blades of the grass, although they feed livestock, they also capture sunlight. And so when they're real short, they're not capturing as much sunlight. And so the grass actually grows a little slower. Then we get to phase 2. And this is a representation right here of phase 2. There's a lot more leaf area out there. Leaves equal solar collectors, and a solar collector is capturing sunlight. So as it's capturing sunlight, check out our line here. It's a lot steeper. So that means it's growing faster. And faster growing grass is what I like. That's good. We're going to come back and we're going to talk about phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And if you'll notice here, phase 3 has these little things up here, these little round things, and that's supposed to be seed heads. So it starts off slow. We got small leaf area. Then the plant gets big enough and it really takes off. And then look what happens in phase 3. It starts to level off again. The plant gets mature. It focuses on making seed, and it slows down. In this little S-shaped curve, there's a lot of things in biology that you'll see that are like this. The way grass grows happens to be one of those things. But let's take a look at I got another video. Let's see if this is gonna work. I couldn't embed the video. Google didn't like it, but we're actually going to watch some grass grow. Anybody watched grass grow before? Well,
not on my top 10 favorite activities.
well, one of the good things about this version of watching grass grow is it's time-lapse photography. So what that means is they take a picture, and then they wait a while, and then they take another picture. So what we're going to see is, I think it's about 2 weeks. I think it says in the beginning of the video, but we're going to take a couple weeks, and we're going to compress it down to, I think, 47 seconds. So we'll be watching grass grow fast, if this works.
See if we can notice the stages.
All right. So let's see, are you seeing that?
Yeah, would you want to expand it? And there you go.
Like that?
That's a little easier.
Well, good. Well, thank you, because I'm not sure what you're seeing. All right, here we go. I'm going to start it. This is University of Kentucky, Ray Smith. He's the forage specialist there. So we've got two different kinds of pots here, and I've paused it. On the left, that's obviously the stuff that's been grazed down to 1 inch. And on the right, that's where it's at 3.5 inches. And if you'll remember that graph that we saw where there was phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, the idea is that the pot on the left is starting off at phase 1, and the pot on the right is starting off closer to phase 2. So we'll watch the rest of this. So if you look, it looks like the pot on the right has grown a good bit more than the pot on the left. All right. If somebody asks you, you can now share with them that you spent part of your summer watching grass grow.
Hey, Seth, you might want to close that window so it doesn't keep playing videos too before you start your presentation.
Close this one?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Let me see. I got to start the presentation again, don't I?
Mm-hmm.
No, it's going. I just got to do like that. Okay. So thank you, Sarah. So we watched it grow from phase 1 to phase 2 for the pot on the left, and really to start at phase 2 and start to go up this line for the pot on the right. And that's where how the grass is actually managed is really important, because it takes grass to grow grass. If you, and let me go back, if you mow the grass too short, especially with fescue, with Bermuda, it can handle close grazing and it's fine. But with fescue, that's what we were dealing with. Grazing height's really important. And if you overgraze, it takes a lot longer for the pasture to recover, and things just don't work as well. And so part of that feeds back to that ecosystem concept, where how you manage the grazing in the pasture affects what those animals are going to be eating, and how many animals you can carry in the pasture, and a whole bunch of things. But there's another concept that we really need to look at, because we again, here you can see at the bottom, we've got phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, and that's exactly what we were looking at before with how the grass grows. And in fact, this green line represents what that other graph was showing us. It starts off slow in phase 1, rapid growth in phase 2, and then it slows off, and actually even you can lose some yield. So yield would be, if this were a hay field, yield would mean we're not going to get as many hay bales out of that field. That would be the quantity of hay we'd be getting. But now there's two other lines on here. We've got one, this red one, that says protein, and so protein is a component of feed, and is a component of what animals need. And typically people like to feed more protein than less, but animals have a requirement. But as we can see here, the protein content goes down from phase 1 to phase 2 a little bit, and then it goes down some more from phase 2 to phase 3. The blue line, so we like protein in feed. This blue line is called cell wall, lignin, and stem. So what happens as this plant grows and matures, there's more cell wall and lignin. These are structural components of the grass, things that help it stand upright. And those are less digestible. The more of that there is, the less nutritious the grass is. So what happens is, if we were to make hay, or turn the animals in way down here, we would see that we've got high protein content and low cell wall, or this fibrous component that's not easily utilized by grazing animals. So that's really good, but the problem is we don't have much of it. So we let the grass grow a little bit, and right in this area, we kind of feel like that's where the lines come together, and that's where we've got adequate yield, which is the green line, adequate nutrition, which is a good level of protein, and we have some structural components, or this fiber, but not too much like what we have over here in phase 3. So it's kind of a compromise when you're either going to make hay or you're going to graze the forage, and that's what you're always kind of fighting, or what you're trying to balance. So that's another concept as we're thinking about this ecosystem. So last time when we looked at the ecosystem, we were thinking about the grass, and we've sort of gone over that. But now I've got the animal part covered, or colored. So that's what I'm kind of thinking about now. So let's take a look. But as we saw before, how close these animals graze the forage affects it. The plant height affects the quality, which then feeds back to the animal. So let's take a look. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking I used a steer is a placeholder, just like I use that glob of green grass as a placeholder for all the different forages that could be. But what can you think of, what kind of grazing animals can utilize forage? And I was thinking it might be fun to try to make some sounds of what your favorite grazing animal is. Anybody brave enough to give it a try?
Mine are quiet.
You've got quiet grazing animals. Well, fair enough. That's a good one. I hadn't expected that one. About the only thing I can make is a moo sound.
What do you want to make? I see a picture of a goat. Wonder if anybody wants.
I think my
When my goat grazes, he makes a sound that sounds like this. Like that.
That's pretty
excellent. Good. Thank you. My wife can do a goat sound. I'm not so good at it. Well, let's take a look. So if you guys thought about it, I thought cattle, sheep, goats, horses. We actually have llamas and alpacas in the county, and I know there's some across the state. Donkeys, mules, and wildlife. What am I missing? Well, I'll tell you guys a story. Oh, yes, Cameron. Am I missing anything? So I'll tell you guys a story. A few years ago, I got a call to look at a pasture, and it was actually down in the Baton community, which Sarah knows where that is. And I got there, and in the pasture was actually a camel. I was, needless to say, I was quite shocked. And I was cleaning out my office the other day, and I actually ran across the guy's number. And it turns out I didn't write down the fellow who actually owned the camel. I wrote down the camel's name. His name was Chewy. But he was actually a retired doctor that he had 2 camels, and one of them was named Chewy. So
about zebras might be another one.
Yeah, there's definitely some exotic ones. I'd put zebra under wildlife,
Wildlife,
as well as
sure.
deer and other things. I've got a question, and this is interesting. What do sheep, goats, and cattle have in common that's different from horses, donkeys, mules, and zebras? Anybody have any guesses?
What's the difference between them?
Yes. So cattle, sheep, and goats are similar in this respect, and horses and donkeys and mules and zebras.
Daisy says their stomachs.
That is right. That is right. Technically, they all have one stomach. But the big difference is that cattle, sheep, and goats have 4 compartments in that stomach, whereas horses, donkeys, mules, zebras, and rabbits, I didn't even think of rabbits, they have a stomach that's similar to ours. They have some special features after their stomach called the ceca, where they actually do what cattle, sheep, and goats do in that 4 compartment stomachs. But cattle, sheep, and goats are called ruminants. Has anybody ever heard that term before? Oh yeah, you've heard it before? Well, good. Well, it means, I need to turn my volume up here. Let me. So so cattle, sheep, and goats are ruminants, and the whole we'll get to why they're actually called ruminants and a little bit later. Now I do want to just represent or share that there's other things, there's other biology besides just the grass and just the animals. There's a lot of soil microbes, everything from earthworms and fungi and bacteria and dung beetles, slugs, spiders, nematodes. And also what's really important is that ruminants, or these hindgut fermenters like the horses, they actually have protozoa and bacteria and fungi that live inside their stomach that breaks that forage down. So we don't always think about those animals that are living inside the grazers, but if they weren't there, they wouldn't be able to live on these forage diets. So I've got a picture here, and let's see, what did I say? What do you see? So what is this? Let me see if I can get my little pointer back. So what do you guys see right here?
A muzzle.
A muzzle, a mouth. That's exactly right.
Goat.
That's a goat. That's right. And then what about this guy over here? Kind of the same thing, don't you? It's his mouth, and you can see where there's a little line down here, but their lips look pretty pliable. Let's look at the next picture. All right, what do you guys see here? So this is a cow.
I see a line too, but it has a bunch of bumps.
It's a bunch of bumps, and this is actually really kind of thick. This is not something that cow really has a lot of control over. It's more of a like a thick callus type skin, whereas when I look back at these others, these animals can actually use their lips and their tongue and their bottom lip to actually decide what they're going to pick at. And that's really important, because a cow really can't use its lips to pick at grass. That's actually pretty tough. Guess what it uses? Guess what this thing is?
Its tongue.
It uses its tongue. That's exactly right. So the fancy word for getting stuff into your mouth is called prehension. And with sheep and goats, they'll use their lips to actually pick at different leaves that they want, and they can be very specific. You may have, if you're, I know I saw a picture of a goat on somebody's, not avatar, but for their image, and goats can actually go in and eat things like a rose bush. They can actually get in there and pick off individual leaves without getting scratched. This guy right here, there's no hope, or this girl in this case, no hope. It's more like a steam shovel. So I'm telling you all this because the next thing we're going to do, we've watched grass grow, and now it's time to see that grass being harvested. So we're going to watch this video, and I want you guys to pay attention to what you see. And then we're gonna have a chance to talk about it. So here we go, and I'm going to try to make this as big as I can once I get it started. Uh-oh. Well, I thought I was going to. Maybe go back to mouse. I bet that'll work. see. Well, let me. Did anybody, we'll get the video, we'll try to get that video back, but did anybody see what was happening?
Yes.
Yeah.
Let me ask this. The first question is, what kind of grass was that animal eating? It was one or the other of the major grass species. Would you say it was Bermuda grass, or do you think it was fescue, tall fescue?
Bermuda.
Okay, okay, that's a good guess, but it turns out it was actually,
Emily says,
Fescue doesn't have any.
yes, it was fescue. Fescue's got a really long stem, really long leaves. So that's actually what Patches, that's that cow's name. She was eating fescue. So excellent. And how was that cow actually getting the grass into her mouth?
With its tongue.
Had you ever seen that before?
I see it with horses sometimes. They use their tongue and lips to grab their food.
Okay. Well, it's kind of neat, and of course, the other thing that the animal does, like horses have teeth on their in the top and teeth in the bottom, just like us, and then of course they have molars in the back. And a cow actually has teeth on the bottom and then a dental pad on the top. And what that, if we look again, once that cow goes out with her tongue and gets the grass, pulls it into her mouth, and then just a tiny little flick of her head, and she actually uses her neck muscles to cut that grass with her teeth up against her dental pad. So that's one of the more important things. Sometimes if grass is too short, it might be, if it was in phase 1, for example, and we turned those animals out into a pasture, they wouldn't physically be able to eat enough to cover their needs. So that's one of the things about a little bit longer grass. I think I've got another picture or two on this slide set. Let's see what else we've got. So, because I think we're getting close to our time. So any questions about any other things you guys noticed about how that cow was eating, consuming that grass? Now, to me, I noticed that she stuffed her face with a whole lot of grass, but she wasn't chewing her food very well, was she?
Mm-mm.
So what she's going to do is, once she gets done filling her belly, she's going to lay down and she's going to ruminate, or she's actually going to re-swallow her food, bring it from her stomach back into her mouth, and she's going to use those teeth at the back of her jaw, and she's going to chew sideways, and she's going to make that grass, she's going to break it up into smaller bits, swallow it, regurgitate some more, or re-swallow some more, and she's going to go ahead and she's going to spend several hours after she fills her belly with grass. She's going to spend several hours ruminating, and so that's why they're called ruminants. Horses don't do that. They don't chew their food a second time. They chew it once and swallow it, whereas cows and other ruminants, sheep and goats, they do that. And so far as I've been talking, I've been thinking totally about how animal harvests the grass, and then it'll consume the grass, and then out the back end comes fertilizer, which grows the grass again. And it's a nice little system that feeds back on itself. So our grass or our forage captures sunlight. That energy is then stored in the plant as growth and as sugar. The animal goes ahead and uses her tongue to bring it in her mouth. She bites it off. She digests what she can, and out the back end goes that fertilizer. And it's a nice little cycle. Everything works pretty good. Hopefully we move the animal on to greener pastures before she grazes it down too close. But that's sort of what happens. But what if we had grass and we didn't have an animal to harvest it? What would that be? Anybody want to guess? Anybody ever seen a hay field?
Yes.
So that's what a hay field is. A hay field is where you're harvesting the grass, you're getting it out of the hay field, and you're taking it to the animal at a different location. But what happens is this top arrow, this top arrow, usually what's coming out of the back end of this animal doesn't come back on the grass. So we're actually moving nutrients out of the hay field and putting it in the pasture where this animal is. So that's a little difference between pastures and hay fields. The other thing is a lot of times pastures are either continuously or grazed multiple times, and the animal gets to select what it wants to eat, whereas hay fields, it's mechanically harvested, so that mower doesn't really care if it's a weed that the animal doesn't like to eat or not. It cuts the whole thing off. So the difference between hay fields and pastures, although they seem like they would be the same, there's these differences are not very subtle, and so you'll notice a lot of times people have problems with a good stand of grass in their hay field. A lot of times the weeds are different between a hay field and a pasture, and those are the reasons why. It's the ecosystem has changed. It's not the same, and that's. Can you think of any other ways that hay fields differ from pastures?
Hay fields, you don't have animals in, and pastures are for animals.
That's exactly right. So there is a compaction difference there. You know, you compacting the soil. Of course, you don't have the fence, which is usually why people are harvesting it for hay. But when you drive down the road next time, or you have your own pastures and hay fields, look to see what's growing there and look to see what's different. I know we're well, according to my clock, we're fast approaching the 2 o'clock hour. And I think differences between pastures and hay fields probably a pretty good place to stop. I'll ask if there's any questions or thoughts, or did I miss something you guys were interested in? I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to share with everybody. I get kind of excited about watching grass grow, and even more excited when I get to see animals harvest it. I don't know if you guys could hear the cattle actually biting the grass off or tearing the grass, but sometimes that's pretty therapeutic. Sarah, can you think of anything else I've missed? I don't want to keep these guys past the 2 o'clock hour.
A pretty good overview. If somebody ends up with a question, they can contact Caldwell County office and we can chat about it or get you some more information. But those are the basics.
Well, excellent. Well, I hope you guys have a good rest of the day. Thank you for spending an hour with me. And it went a lot quicker than I thought it would. Hope you have a good one. Bye-bye.